All right, hey everybody, I want to do a video on the big brain model. Let's check it out. All right, here it is. And first off, this is a huge model of the brain. This is not the actual size of the brain. This is super huge to see some of the structures. And here's the company if you're curious of where this came from. And this is very detailed. In fact, it's so detailed that they often will sign right here who painted this, because this is hand crafted. Let's jump into some of the structures. When you're talking about the brain, you've got the cerebellum up here, or the lobes, and then the cerebellum down here, and then the brainstem and some deeper stuff in there as it leads down to the spinal cord. Definitely some nerves branching off both the forebrain and also the brainstem and the spinal cord. So let's go through those first. Now, if you look up here, this is the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. So this number one would be the olfactory nerve. That's the sense of smell. Down here, number two. Now we're talking about the optic nerve. One on either side, going to where the eyes would be right here. 115 would be the pituitary gland. That sits right about here in this area. And then if we keep going, number three, cranial nerves, it's like way down in there. You can barely even see it. And that's because it's coming from deep in the midbrain. And if I come over here, yes, we have another big brain model. We got a bunch of them in here. If I move the brainstem out of the way, now do you guys see number three? Number three is located right here, and this is the midbrain. This is the pons. This is number three right here, which would be the oculomotor nerve. Okay, well, back to this brain. Number four, a little bit easier to see. And these are all in Roman numerals, so make sure you know Roman numerals for these. Four, come over here, would be trochlear. Then you get to five, trigeminal. It's a little bit bigger. Then you come up here to six, abducens, and it goes 6, 7, 8. 7 is facial, 8 is vestibulocochlear, and I always remember AFV. There used to be a TV show called America's Funniest Videos. So I remember AFV for those three. Then we come down here and we've got 9, 10, 11. 9 is glossopharyngeal, 10 is vagus, 11 is spinal accessory, because now we're coming off the spinal cord, and then 12 is up here, hypoglossal. That's coming off the medulla. So those are the cranial nerves, and I got another video talking all about cranial nerves on my channel, but let's keep going with the brain structures. If I spin it to the side, you can see the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital, and temporal. But let me bring it over to here so you can see this in the more traditional view. Now, how do you know what's frontal versus parietal? Well, there's a very famous sulcus right here called the central sulcus. And the central sulcus divides frontal from parietal. So here we have the precentral gyrus, a gyrus that is before the central sulcus. And this deals with voluntary motor movement. We also have the post-central gyrus over here, which deals with somatosensory processing. On the other brain, on this colorful brain, we can see that really clear as the red for the precentral gyrus, red up here, and then the blue, post-central gyrus. Okay, well, this is the central sulcus right here, this little valley, and think sulcus sinks into the brain, but gyri, or the gyruses here, are the mountaintops. Well, how about this indent? This valley sinks in right here. This would be the lateral sulcus. lateral sulcus. And we know the frontal lobe also does things like higher level thinking, critical thinking, personality, motor movement, that sort of stuff. Temporal lobe, now we're dealing with hearing. Back here, occipital lobe, now we're dealing with vision. As a good comparison with the colored brain, you can see where those lobes approximately would be. But bring it back to here, and let's talk about the cerebellum. Lots of functions of the cerebellum. They're popping up on your screen right now. Here's a good look at it fully. But how about if we come over here and we look inside? And now we can see inside the cerebellum in these white structures that are called arbor vitae. Arbor vitae, the white structures. So within here would be this stuff. Well, let's keep going internally since we're in here. We can see something called the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum are axons that bridge between the hemispheres. And in fact, if you were to look straight through here, deep in there where the probe is, that's where the corpus callosum is. So imagine this as a bridge across the hemispheres. All right, something special right underneath the corpus callosum is the septum pellucidum, number 44 right here. Now, what this is it's a membrane dividing the right and left lateral ventricles. What's a ventricle? On this brain, you can see the lateral ventricle without the septum pellucidum. See how it's like this gap of space, this hollow area right here? That's the lateral ventricle. Over here, it's been blocked off by this membrane. So imagine this underneath or deep to this structure here. Okay, let's keep going. And we can see a couple other ventricles. Let me do those at this time. Right here, this little space, this area, this would be the third ventricle. Again, I'm pointing at space, not an actual structure. This would be the cerebral aqueduct, little narrow space here, leading down to this triangular fourth ventricle. You can also see the central canal as this narrow passageway traveling down the spinal cord. Back to this model, and now let's point at some actual structures. Here you can see the thalamus, and the thalamus is a structure you can actually tap, and the thalamus is a relay center mainly for information in the brain. Number 47 though is the interthalamic adhesion, which would connect both thalamuses. So there's one on the right, one on the left, deep in there. You gotta have something that connects it. That's this thing right here. Underneath the thalamus is the hypothalamus. Now we're talking about hormones. Hypothalamus. And the pituitary would sit right here. You can't see it on this one, but over here, here it is. That's the pituitary gland. Remember that one? Inferior to the hypothalamus. Real close to optic nerve too. Well, we also have the midbrain. This is the anterior portion of the midbrain, and this is the posterior portion where you can see two dots, or rather two relay centers. Both of them collectively are called the quadriminal plate, and the top one is the superior colliculus. That relays visual information. Superior colliculus, visual. Think visual is like your sight, superior SS. Well, down here, inferior colliculus. This is a relay center for auditory information. Inferior is an I, that's a vowel. Auditory starts with an A, that's a vowel. So remember, auditory, vowel, inferior, vowel. Well, midbrain also helps with the cranial nerve. Again, remember number 3 coming off right here. But then we get to the pons. The pons is this bubble as well as this extension back here, and it's pretty much on the same level as the middle of the cerebellum. but directly inferior to the pons is the medulla, number 63. And both the pons and the medulla help with some very primitive basic functions of the body. Once you go down here, and really, let's say you're inferior to the cerebellum, now you're in the spinal cord. And remember, the spinal cord just doesn't cut off right here. It would go all the way down someone's back. Here's a great model showing the brain with the brainstem and eventually the spinal cord forming right here and traveling all the way down to about L1, L2 is where the spinal cord ends, but that's another video for that information. A few last structures that I have not tested on yet or told you guys. This is the pineal gland. Pineal gland right here. This one is going to deal with the production of melatonin. That is different than what the choroid plexus would be, which would be some cells, capillaries in the ventricles. This model doesn't really even show that well, but on the other model, we can see that. So pink would be pineal gland, but in purple, that's the choroid plexus, and that would help produce cerebral spinal fluid for the ventricles. Check out my video on the ventricles and cerebral spinal fluid if you're interested in that. Other than that, I'll give you another view of the entire brain. It's a big, big brain, and I like the detail with the sulcus and gyri and the lobes, as well as the cranial nerves are really, really clear to see on here. But then I also like how you can see the superior colliculus right here and the inferior colliculus, in addition to actually seeing the ventricles with the empty spaces right here and here and here. A few more structures deep in the brain, and I'd mentioned before the thalamus and the hypothalamus and the interthalamic adhesion, but what are these yellow dots here? Well, this one is the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure, not to be confused with the pineal gland, which is right here, and the superior colliculus and the inferior colliculus of the quadrigeminal plate of the midbrain down there. So what do the commissures do? They connect. So commissures connect is a great way to remember what's going on with those. Well, up here, 45, this is called the fornix. And the fornix is also a connector. Deep back in here, we have parts of the basal ganglia. And now we're talking about the limbic system, basal ganglia. And if I were to pull off this part right here, I want you to see deeper into the brain. Here's a good look at it. And you can see 99, that's actually part of the choroid plexus. Let me pull this out. There we go. 99 is part of the choroid plexus, producing cerebral spinal fluid for the ventricles and eventually to the subarachnoid space. This is part of the thalamus, and this would be a right thalamus. There would be a left one over here. Basal ganglia working with the hippocampus, leading all the way around and eventually terminating into the amygdala. Not seen super clearly in here, but it would be right around here. Now we also have one more, and if you follow the fornix the other way, and the fornix is weird because it kind of comes out and then you lose it here. So it kind of dives deep and it pops out at the mammillary body. Mammillary body right here, not to be confused with pituitary gland or hypothalamus, but mammillary bodies. And there's one on the right and the left. All right, let me know if you have any questions on the big brain model. I can do a separate video on just the cranial nerves on this model because they're super, super clear. And I like testing using this model in my lab. But that's all I've got. I'm Professor Klein in the Ohio University Anatomy Lab. Thanks for watching.